Lynn, I'll just give you a quick intro. You probably don't need another big introduction, but Lynn Kuhn is here with us, partnering with me to present some topics from letters. We're focusing on units 3 and 4. Really, we spent a lot of time digging into what would be the best for us to present in a really short period of time. Each of these units is meant to be a 6-hour day virtually, and I think an 8-hour day in person. Is that right, Lynn?
Around 7, yeah.
Yeah, so we're doing 2 units in 4 hours. So cliff notes to some degree, but we also talked about what can we really just do well and hopefully circle back to in PLCs or more meetings in the future based on our needs. So without further ado, I'm gonna just turn it over to Lynn and let her get started.
Sure. Well, welcome everyone. It's nice to see some of you. I know a few, we were fortunate to have a short PLC after our content when we were together earlier on this year, and hopefully everybody is sort of finding some semblance of normalcy in a smidgen of a way. So let us jump in, and we're going to spend this evening looking at Unit 3. And then when we return on Thursday, we'll look at Unit 4 for the big ideas. So know that that's kind of the guiding practices. And so as we look at the content in Unit 3, there are 8 sort of key sessions that you participated online. And we're going to make some connections to the first, why is code emphasis instruction important? Then we'll link into some of the conversation around Lene Aries' work. We will have an opportunity to be a participant in a phonics lesson that was introduced to you on page 166. And then we will share a few instructional strategies more explicitly that were a part of the sessions on 5, 6, and 7. So it gives you a little bit of our big ideas for tonight. And so I'm going to sort of unpack a little bit of the relationship to what was introduced with the theoretical models. And then we have a different type of simulation that we will have you be a participant with, and then experience what that's going to be like. So know that that's coming down the pike here tonight. And spend a little bit more time with Lene Aries' phases. I think we very briefly went through that when we were in Unit 1 in our conversation. So find that it's a really nice template to think about the journey of where a student is across the phases. And then we will switch gears, and Lori's going to share with you as participants for a lesson, and then we'll model what's called phoneme grapheme mapping a little bit more explicitly, and looking at what do we mean by decodable text. So let's go ahead and jump in, and I welcome any questions, clarifications that you might request or want to expand upon into the chat. And that's usually one of the best ways. I kind of monitor if I see any hands raised as well. So the tools. This is a huge part of Unit 3, and that's the lesson planner. And it's kind of, I wish it would just rather say a resource guide of instructional tools that you can build into a lesson, because as you will see Lori modeling, she will choose within these different routines a few explicitly to what a day 1 of an introduction of a new concept is. And then inside here is a menu of ideas that have also been shared in sessions 5 through 7. Another set of information that was brought forward is the letters decoding survey, and it is actually in the back part of your appendix area, as well as Lori having shared with you 3 assessments that have been a part of letters, one being the PASS test, the second is this phonics letters survey, and then the third tool is actually a spelling inventory. The page that you're seeing on the slide related to the decoding survey is how one collects data after administering the survey. We'll do a brief connection to what that can be used as a vehicle of thinking about where your entry point might be in a phonics lesson. And then finally, in the back of your appendix as well, those first 2 pages is actually a scope and sequence. And this also becomes helpful so that you will have a better sense of creating lessons and then figuring out what's come before it, so that if I'm looking at a type of text that I want to choose in a lesson, I can scan that text and say, okay, oh, we've already done. And so I look here and it says, interesting, we've gone ahead and done, these are controlled vowels. So in my story that I might choose for a controlled text, I would be able to include some of those patterned words because they've already had experience with it. So that's how a scope and sequence really provides support. And we'll visit this as well in Unit 4 and just sort of do a think about. So using that as our backdrop, then we think about, okay, what is my data telling me? And where are my strengths for my students? Where will I be weaving in these theoretical models in my thinking? And so one of them that we spent time using the pipe cleaners was an opportunity to understand that Hollis Scarborough really looked at word recognition, and that we unpack the targets of word recognition through phonological awareness, from syllable to initial sound to all the phonemes in a word. And then we look at the scope and sequence of decoding, starting with that simple speech to print alphabetic principle, then looking at the continuum of spelling and sound correspondences. And you had some time inside of Unit 3. It might have been a while ago since you were online with that content, but there are a lot of different sorts that were introduced for you to just get a better sense of how we can actually look at different ways to engage students. For example, if there's a k at the end of a 1-syllable word, when do I think about using it with a K versus a CK? And so you had some of those types of spelling expectancies that were sorts that linked to spelling sound correspondences. And then finally, with Lene Airy's work, the speaking of sight recognition, how efficiently are students learning the code and then incorporating that so that their fluency levels grow based on the level of exposure to patterns within words and owning those. And then we spoke about, this is only part of a lesson. And the other part of the lesson is linking to language comprehension. And so you're all inside of Volume 2, so you've had an opportunity to start unpacking the importance of vocabulary from breadth and depth, why background knowledge is important, why it's really healthy to think about comprehension within the lens of the complexity of sentences, from syntax to semantics, and then looking at the higher order thinking of reasoning. Well, then we also introduced the simple view of reading and how we can overlay in a more simplistic visual what the tenets of the interaction, because there's a multiplication sign between word recognition and language comprehension. And that lower half, just as we follow the rope, has to become increasingly automatic. And that language comprehension, we follow those strands, and they're always becoming more and more strategic for life, both leading to reading comprehension. Well, then we have one more model that we brought into our conversation, which was the 4-part processing system by Marilyn Yeager Adams and Seidenberg and McClellan. And again, you start realizing that it's not a simple one-way path to understanding the complexity of a proficient reader and writer. So that the work that went on in Unit 2 really dug into that phonological piece. And in Unit 3, we're really dissecting the orthographic piece to build phonics, the foundation, but we always want to represent that words all have a connection to meaning. And those meanings may vary depending on the context of how those words are used. You're going to see that experience in the lesson today. But our work in volume 1 is generally considered the heavy lifting of what needs to be in the rebars of instruction for code. Well, we moved into the hourglass in Unit 2, and we really are hopeful that you've had a chance to think about perhaps trying the past test with a few of your students or other phonological awareness assessments in K and 1 that really get you to understand, where are my students within these 3 bands? Because we know that generally speaking, by this point in the year for kindergartner, they should be definitively at this basic level of phonological instruction. The idea of taking a word, identifying each of their individual phonemes by blending those phonemes together, which will support reading, and segmenting those phonemes, which will support spelling. But if you're now thinking, okay, you've just said K1, where do I fit in, second through secondary? And that's where your lens looks at how children that you're working with, and as we get older, students that are performing in an at-risk domain. And for those students, we can start filtering where they may have difficulty by looking at their spelling and noting, are they spelling orthographically that I can read it? So spelling it more phonetically, or are there a lot of random letters that are in the strings, or missing letters, missing vowels within those words? And that right there becomes one of those flags to say, maybe it would be helpful to administer the past test, because I may need to open my lessons in literacy around some opportunity to manipulate phonemes by deleting sounds, substituting sounds, and so forth. So that's what I invite you to think about as you're sort of closing the year. You may not have as many opportunities, but a few of those students that have really been a puzzle for you, there may be an underlying weakness in the manipulation of phonemes. But for today, we're going to move ourselves into Unit 3. We're going to go down the second half of this hourglass, and we're going to discuss and think about, from our learnings, where do all of these elements, a grapheme, what is it? A digraph, what is it? A trigraph. Those are terminologies that we all want to become comfortable with, so that when we do an activity a little bit later this evening, we're going to do something called phoneme grapheme mapping. And that will kind of bring across what we mean a little bit more explicitly with the term grapheme, for example, and digraph. When we come back together again on Thursday, that's when we're going to say, well, hey, if I'm at the simple level, so to speak, or basic level of phonics, what does that mean for students who are showing some real skill sets in dissecting words, but maybe not be as fluent as we want them to? Or they come up against a lot of unique words and they're words stumbling through them. What does that mean, and how can we support that? And that's a lot of what we'll be giving those think abouts during Unit 4 on Thursday. So here's your activity. So hopefully you have printed out those pages, and on the first page you should have a set of blanks, and on the top it'll say 70, 80, 90 on the top of your page. And if you didn't get a chance to print it out, if you go ahead and just take a sheet of paper, tri-fold it number 1 through 20, because we're going to move into this activity and we're going to have you be participating. So hopefully you also have either a clipboard or a space on your table by your computer, because we're going to ask you to be filling in some words on this task. I'll let you go ahead and pull yourself together with a piece of material to make this activity come alive for you. Okay. So when you're ready, if you could give me a thumbs up or hit the Zoom that shows me that, that'll be great. Thank you. All right, I'm seeing a few of your hands raised. All right, thanks. Good, good. Appreciate it. All right, I think we're close to getting there with everybody. Okay. Well, here's the story. Okay, so what's going to happen as I move to the next slide is that I'm going to have a piece of text that I'm going to ask you to read, and there will be some blanks, and I'd like you to make some thoughtful decisions of what you think the words would be to fill in those blanks. But I'm only going to give you a couple minutes to go ahead and do this process. Okay, so here we go. Start jotting the words you think will fit. So how many are saying, I'm ready to give up? How many are thinking about, I have no idea what this is about? And what happens if I say, okay, this was a passage where somebody had 70% accuracy. How successful do you think they're going to be? So let's see what we can do about that. All right. I'm going to move us to this next column, giving you a little support here. Will you be changing any of your words right now, or will you be refiguring? I'll let you go ahead and revisit this. How many of you remember the day when we would say 80% was considered an instructional level? And how successful do you feel about this passage right now? Could you tell me about it? I just asked you to read it. Anybody have some thoughts that they think the theme of the story could be, or what a title could be? You could put in the chat box. I'm not seeing a lot of responses. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we have some things that are thinking about gardening. I can't get ants out of my head. Meet Edward Scissorhands. Creating art from plants. some garden animals, the woods, hedge sculptures. Okay, so we have some possibilities. But I'm not sure. Would you think you'd be particularly successful if I now asked you about 3 or 4 comprehension questions? So let's try and move forward, okay? Do you want to make any changes now? Anyone want to start changing what they think the title is? We're at 90%. We're getting close to being independent readers, right? What happens if I tell you this is the title, Unusual Gardens? Go ahead and read the passage now.
Catherine's sticking with Edward Scissorhands. Typical middle school humor.
That's exactly what actually happened when I was working with some secondary teachers as well. That's what came to mind. So you're in good hands with that. All right. So I've just had you participate in an activity that gave you an opportunity to think about the difference changes that happened as you were moving from a piece of text that went from 70% accuracy to 80% accuracy to 90% accuracy. And where did that sit for you? So what I'm going to ask you to do right now, and I'll set the breakout rooms. I want you to think about choosing a recorder in your breakout rooms. But what I'd like you to do as a conversation is talk about how was your comprehension impacted when we transitioned between these 3 slides, and what perhaps might be some takeaways from this activity that may also be a part of your consideration as you're working with different student populations. So I'll give you about 6 minutes to work in your groups. If you feel it's helpful to take a snapshot of this to remember what it is, please do. And if we're ready, we'll send you off to your breakout rooms. And again, choose a recorder so when we come back, some of the rooms can share out. See you back here in 6 minutes.
Sorry, I'm making dinner, but Jamie, are they like down valley teachers that want to come up?
No, but I mean, I don't know that I can talk about it. Can I talk about it? What are the rules?
I'll let all of you mute yourselves, probably.
Hi there, Lynn. How are you? Sorry, I'm just traveling from school so I am going to join in fully when I get home.
Okay, sounds great, Jamie. Good. Okay. All right. Okay, who would like to possibly share out some of the conversation that happened in your rooms?
I can go.
Great.
Well, first of all, we talked about how hard it was. We had all had different responses to, to the 70%. I gave up, other people tried over and over and over again. And so we talked about how exhausting that is throughout the day. We also talked about when we got to the 90%, we still couldn't fill in the words. So that was still concerning. And then we talked about how, we're expecting students to get to 95% proficiency or 94% proficiency. But even then, it depends, it really depends on the words that are being left out. Are they the critical words to are they the multisyllabic words that are, the main nouns or the main verbs of what you're reading that are, critical?
Mhm.
And then there's the whole background piece. Some people talked about, like, I don't know anything about this subject. And then there was that superhero guy the whole time. I mean, that was like, what's that called? Is it the red
Herring?
herring? Yeah. We're trying to figure out where the superhero fits into the blank somewhere. And he didn't seem to fit in anywhere.
Okay.
That was just wrong.
Well, but how often do we have text, right? That you have
Every
these
day.
extraneous, illustrations that you're going, and where's that from? So great. Thank you. You did a fabulous job sharing your group's conversations. Any other groups that expanded or redirected their conversations in some way?
I can go.
Okay.
So I'm a kindergarten teacher, and I met with Lori and Brad Ewell and then Amy, who's a speech teacher. So we all have very different perspectives. And as a kindergarten teacher, at this point in the year, when we have so many things going on, we're making a movie in our school right now, and Mother's Day and Earth Day and blah, blah, blah. I'm working so hard still on decoding, and now we're doing blends and everything. And it's just so, I've got to remember how important it is to not only make sure that they're getting the words, but that they really are understanding what they're reading. And I know decoding is the most important part, and gaining some sort of fluency for first grade, and comprehension will come along. And many of my kids comprehend very well anyway, but those kids that are struggling a little bit, how important it is for me to still make sure that I am reading to them and with them, and that they're understanding, so that they're not just completely blank on what they're reading. And it's so easy right now in COVID, the way my classroom is set up, because they're reading so individually instead of in a group, like at a group table, like they normally would be, that it's hard for me to bring them together and really read with them as much and talk about the story. So I've got to figure that out in my class here at the end of the year. But Brad was saying some interesting things, and Lori, about how middle school kids, they often read silently, and then how easy it is to miss if some child is having trouble in that grade because they're trying to hide it, because they are reading silently, so you can't hear them, and how many days that would take for you to figure that out. And then Brad was saying, which I remember from teaching his grade also, that some of the kids, the readers who are doing so well, they pick the books that are the books that everybody wants to read, and maybe they're a little more interesting. And then the kids who are struggling a little bit, they just want to read those books. They don't really want to pick the books that are at their level. So I don't know. It's tough. It's a dance. It's an art.
And what does it come down to? That's the question. So at a kindergarten level, you are looking at a whole set of tools that you want to empower them with. You want to build their toolkit, right? And then I'm thinking, Brad, what does that mean for you? Is how do I decipher what students actually need to have as supports, and how do I deliver those supports? Because they have baggage, right? Emotional baggage. If they're an at-risk reader, they're going to find every excuse in the book to not read because they don't feel success. And then when they're required to read, they could very easily be in this very similar position with this unusual garden activity. And the words that they're skipping are the academic words that are going to help them for the meaning of the story. So it's that balancing act, and what's that journey going to look like for our students? And when should we be really making those decisions of conversation related to data, and where do we go? And that's where this activity is trying to really have us be thoughtful about, are we collecting the best set of data from a screening perspective, from a progress monitoring perspective, that can really draw attention to the differentiation that needs to be a part of their learning. Do I have any other group that had other extended thoughts to this activity?
My group talked a little bit about how reading along, you could possibly tell some of those blanks that what part of speech possibly. And I just joked, I just would have rather it be a bad lib, you know, where you just tell me what part of speech and I'll fill it in.
There you go.
And I actually was looking at the Superman too, like, what does he have to do with all this? And so we talked about, you know, and how it was uncomfortable. It was frustrating. At the 80%, we felt a little bit more confident. Myself, I just wanted to get to 90% and get out of that discomfort zone. But a lot of those other things that Dana and Margaret shared, we echo some of that as well.
Well, again, my hope in this activity that we wanted to draw attention to is the following, okay? The question is always, why is code emphasis or phonics instruction important? And I really appreciate a conversation I had in early 2000 during Reading First initiations, and Dr. Torgerson used this quote, and I also use it fairly frequently, that there's no comprehension strategy powerful enough to compensate for the inability to read the words. And we tried to put you into somewhat of an experience in this simulation so that we could really appreciate the importance of that code emphasis, the lower part of the rope, the part of the simple view of reading, as well as the 4-part processing system. So all different angles to look at what are the missing pieces for our students and what are their strengths. And so the important takeaway from a thoughtful sort of decision tree is actually, I heard someone say, well, 94%, 95% accurate. Truly, yes, that is our target, but in actuality, it's 98%. Because that's going to give you that independence of reading basically anything, because you have the skill sets to know when to slow down, when to make that decision tree of breaking a word apart. Do I break that long word apart based on syllables, or am I going to get more bang for my buck, like we talk about at the latter part of Unit 4, by teaching by second, third, and through middle school morphology, so that when they see a lengthy word, can they dissect what's the prefix, what's the suffix, what are those giving me as indicators of the meaning of that word? And that's really the complexity. What does that journey look like? So using that as our backdrop, I'd like to take you into the Linnea Aries phases of word reading. And what I would draw attention to is if you go into your text to page 181, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about what Linnea Aries really wanted to create in the simple, in her phases of reading. And so to do that, I'm going to sort of give you the schema of what she was envisioning. First and foremost, she wants us as educators not to think of these as stages, but phases. And those arrows are intended to model that so that we don't have to reach 100% mastery in the first segment here to move to the next, but that you do want a level of foundational skills so you're more successfully able to move into the next phase from early to later to consolidate it. That's the guiding practice of this image that you're seeing, and then deciding what to do with whom, in what way, and for how long. So using that as our opportunity, it would be the linkages that we take into consideration. So then let me unpack a little bit further, as we spoke about in Unit 2 in our readings, that phonemic awareness is what enables learning the alphabetic code. So if I then look at the bottom of each of the 3 columns, early, late, and consolidated, what I'm observing is, again, where are my students? So when I'm thinking about tier 1 students inside of a kindergarten environment, then the likelihood is that I'm building this idea of understanding a word can be created by syllables, by initial sounds within those words. And then I transition from that stability, then even second half of kindergarten, moving into some of the later alphabetic where I'm working with one syllable words and having that ability to isolate, segment, and blend the individual phonemes within 3 or 4 sound words. Then I'm thinking about that next set of journeys with the first grade, and where we're saying they have to really stabilize basic phonemic awareness and start beginning that understanding of how to manipulate the phonemes within the words. I go into second and beyond, they need to have this element under a consolidated alphabetic ability that they have the flexibility to be able to handle. If I said to you, say the word split, now say it without the p. Think about what has to be manipulated to get to slit. And saying the word where it might be stop, and now add us at the end. They have to hold the word and then they have to add a sound, stops. That's the idea that we're building upon. Or I'm going to say the word is fantastic, take out the fan, and get to tastic, and be able to do it like this. That's the underpinning of code, that phoneme awareness component. Now we layer the mapping of speech to print. So now in kindergarten, we're engaging in that ability to know that we have 26 letters and they're mapping onto 44 sounds, and how are they integrated in our code work of instruction. And then in addition, then how do we take the words that we're building and understanding that those words that we're building are constructed by letters that have sounds. We build from there that mapping of phoneme graphing correspondences. How do we build upon each other so that a student knows that if the word is ship, that yes, it's sh, it. But then when I think about graphemes, not letters, that first sound sh is being represented by an SH. And then we have our next two sounds. And this is the heavy lifting that really stabilizes the code work that is transitioning from the second half of kindergarten into our first grade platform. And then the scope and sequence within that platform is building more words to get to this advanced level so that we can look at one syllable and multisyllabic words and be able to have a tool set to go into these lengthier words that are unique to me. Coupled with the last part of the puzzle, and that's getting to that automaticity part, so that each of these layers are becoming owned by the student, so that it's not about having to think about what it is, but it's actually activating that efficiency, so that if I recollect one of the images that I had shared, perhaps, and I apologize if I have or haven't shared this, but the idea that what is working memory? So when I'm looking at this slide, and put yourselves in what was going on in that activity, when there were so many words that you had to skip because you didn't know how to read them, right? And so what was happening for you is this discomfort, because the reality is we all have the capacity with our working memory to be able to understand information that we're receiving. But when the task becomes more complicated or more unknown, we have to go to those sub skills to be able to figure out how am I going to process those sub skills so that I can understand what I'm reading. And so when I look at a more fluent reader, what they're capable of doing is automatizing those sub skills so it gives them the space to comprehend what they're reading. A less fluent reader of any age, if they don't have those sub skills that we just went through with Linnaeus Aries phases, then they're constantly having to work with this red spot here. They're constantly having to work with those sub skills. By the time they get to the end of the paragraph that they've just read, and then you turn around and say, oh, tell me what you've just read. And they look at you and say, I was supposed to do that too? Because the energy that they're expending to crack the code is enormous. So take any text, whether I'm working with a second grader, a fifth grader, an eighth grader. If there's a whole pot of words that are unfamiliar to them, then there's a greater likelihood that they're going to stumble, and that's going to affect comprehension. Now, if I take the brain that we had worked on, what we're saying is that we are taking this part here, phoneme, grapheme, mapping, and what we're needing to move our students to a success of taking that and moving it to this visual word form area, so that when we speak about a word being accurate and automatic, that automaticity is telling us, that fluency rate is telling us that they are creating a larger and larger bank of words at the consolidated level. Those orthographic mapping components and that expansion of sight word recognition, both regular and irregular words across the context of what they're reading. If I take all of that and we think about where our students across these phases, and then use spelling as the window of opportunity, so that at an early alphabetic, they may be able to tell me what that beginning and ending sound is, but might not have the accurate representation. At later alphabetic, they may map phoneme, grapheme, mapping to sounds that they're familiar with, but they may not have the spelling expectancies of those patterns until we build in those word sorts and those decision trees of how words are constructed. And that's when we'll start seeing the application of the accuracy of spelling. So I'm going to ask you to participate in another activity. Okay? I'd like you to turn in your book to pages 182 and 183. And so it's going to look like this. And it's a great page, 2 pages in a way that you want to tab. And what I'm going to ask of you is the following. On the next slide, I'm going to ask you, you might want to take a screenshot of what you're going to see. I'm giving you 4 different scenarios. And what I'm going to do in a breakout room for you, okay? So you're going to see these 4 scenarios. I'm going to want you to read the scenario, and then I want you to think about which of the 4 areas, so when you turn to this domain here on 182 and 183, the characteristics of that student, are they falling under a pre-alphabetic, an early, later, or consolidated? So that's the goal. So if you could take a screenshot of this, that will be helpful for you to be able to then go into the rooms, and I'm going to have you then participate in having a conversation related to this, and might try to recreate some of these. Maybe we'll get some different groupings here. Does everyone understand the task that I'm asking from all of you? Give us about 5 minutes, and each of you can tackle in your room. Most of you are 4s, some of you are 3s, but each of you kind of take one of the scenarios and then decide by reading through, what do you think they're falling under according to Linnaeus Aries phases? So I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. Let me know, Christy, if I can help.
I'm going to stay and I'm going to make a quick bathroom run.
Go ahead.
I think we're doing with time.
Pretty close. A little off, but I don't think significantly, because we're
Okay.
not, I'm just talking about the accurate to automatic and the big ideas of the survey, and then it'll be yours. So maybe in 10 minutes max,
Mhm.
we should be pretty good.
I hope I can be efficient with the lesson with all the tech stuff so that it doesn't slow us down so that we can get to other pieces.
Well, if push comes to shove and we can't get to phone and graphing tonight, we'll do it on Thursday.
And we do it a little bit in the lesson.
Mhm. Right.
Um,
So I'm not too concerned. We'll get there.
yeah, so you could probably make that decision based on the time
Mhm. Yeah.
to whether we'll just go into decodable texts or
Exactly.
text types of.
Mhm. Tongue twister.
Yeah. So I'm seeing like the host side of the Zoom. It's pretty cool, like how you can pop in and out of the rooms. I usually am on the other side as a participant.
Uh-huh. Except what happens is it messes up everything, and then you have to reset everything when you go into a room and you come back out again. Somehow it does not fluidly keep everything stable for you as the
Meaning
trainer.
like the presentation and things like that, or
Yeah, there's, yeah, just
Oh.
kidding. That's a nuisance. I can just share with you.
Hmm.
It's the only,
and then to broadcast a message, you would just chat it in and it would
yeah,
blow
you
it out.
saw some messages coming in. When you
Yeah.
were wake up, that's what I was doing from here.
Mhm. And you can't message to all or just some of the rooms?
No, it's all or none.
Okay.
Mhm.
And you set a timer.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a little starburst on the bottom left corner that you click and it opens up and it lets you put the times in. All right, we got everyone back. You didn't run away. So did everyone hopefully get through? So who wants to perhaps share with me this first one? Sean often tries to use pictures to guess at words. So what was?
Early.
There we go. Exactly, early. Mhm. Okay, whoops. I didn't move in there. Okay. So this is that idea that, again, so if we're saying that Sean is, okay, and we're looking at wants to rely on context, pictures, topical knowledge to guess at words, then it's kind of giving you some suggestions that we could start blending known phonographing correspondences, going through that process of taking the known and organizing and building that construction of a word so that they can start building that goal of getting more words in that visual word form area. So Marielle is chunking common letter sequences. What did we
Yeah,
think?
that is later alphabetic reading and writing,
Perfect.
starting to chunk common syllables and letter sequences.
Excellent. So on a recent oral reading fluency assessment, Davion is increasing his accuracy and automaticity. It's kind of a giveaway. What do you think?
Consolidated.
Mhm. And just that, again, what we talk about the end of linearis phases, pulling everything together. And that really, if you think about it from the discussion many of us have had in our pre-service, that idea of learning to read, reading to learn, you're going to be so much more successful in that reading to learn paradigm shift when you get into that consolidated zone. And then Marlowe's beginning to match words orally by the first sound in the word. It'll be pre-alphabetic. Mm-hmm. Thoughts, wonders related to this opportunity?
So can I ask, so I thought when you were saying earlier, you said that the initial phoneme was under early alphabetic.
So
I thought that's what you said. That's what I wrote down.
okay.
So I was thinking that that would be early alphabetic.
So again, initial phoneme, you're talking about the early alphabetic here, where it's saying working at syllable and initial sound. Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And that's a part of early alphabetic. And so your conversation in noting that Marlowe's beginning to match words orally by the first sound. Matching is different. Matching is just saying he's getting that foundational beginning process at that pre-alphabetic to early alphabetic. Remember, this isn't going to be a pure environment, but that if the student is just at that early stage, is beginning to match words orally, then I'm going to build upon that. So if we go ahead and look at the instruction, okay, blend the parts of compounds and syllables, then onset rhyme, then phonemes, one syllable. So right now, he's at that characteristic level at pre-alphabetic, right? And then we're saying, these are the strategies that we're going to be incorporating into our practice. And that's where I share, it's getting a sense of where they are in that journey. Were you thinking that that would be more early alphabetic? Is that the conversation? And you can, yes. And so I would tell you that, again, it's not going to be signed sealed. It's not a purity, but it is generating a schema to understand if these are some of the characteristics, they're probably at the edge of that pre-alphabetic, early alphabetic. So I'm going to move them more stably into the early alphabetic if I'm seeing those behaviors.
Okay.
Does that give you-
Lynn, can I add, I think if I'm understanding correctly, the difference between what Christy's asking and your conversation is that matching the words orally by initial consonants versus trying to sound out by the first letter.
Correct.
So matching by first sounds like what sounds like the first sound in fish? Is it fun or past? That's an example of matching the first sound?
Yes,
You're giving them a choice.
correct. It's
Okay. I was thinking he was using the first sound.
okay.
And then if that's true, then that is, you're right, early alphabetic. Tries to sound out by associating sound with the first letter.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay.
So you're both like having the conversation, but it's about like a micro
I see where
difference.
I see where my mistake was.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't call it a mistake, Christy, because your observation is well taken. Because this is a student on the cusp. And
Okay.
so, and that's why you can't stay, that's why they're called phases. If I'm seeing that layer of observational behavior, then now I'm understanding what am I going to provide thoughtfully in my teaching to move that into that early alphabetic phase. Okay.
Okay.
Well, and I often think that I struggled with this with the book because I do understand that using the pictures has to do with relying on context, which is a higher order skill or the next phase skill. But what I find in my kindergarten class, especially at the beginning of the year, is that the kids want to totally rely on the picture and just completely blow off the first sound or the word altogether. And so you might have a picture, the word might be black, blackbird, and they're just looking at, they just say bird or whatever. I don't know. The picture doesn't quite match the word, and they're just going with the picture because they don't understand letter matching yet. So to me, that whole using a picture thing is kind of funny to have that as early alphabetic instead of pre-alphabetic. Because I feel like they rely on the picture before they understand letter sound combination often.
Part of it's the scenario of what is the task visually and auditorily. And again, in pre-alphabetic, it's a lot of that experiences of the sounds in our language, and we're exposing them to those phonemic awareness entry points of initial sound. That is key in building the platform. And early alphabetic, as we look here at what tends to be a behavior that could actually become a roadblock for them, because then they learn to over rely, and we have to change that behavior and move it to, well, how do we build and learn words? And so if you think about how a number of you made that statement when we were going through the instructional activity, where you were distracted by the red man in the picture, because your eye wanted to go there and think, well, where does that fit into the story? And that's what we're trying to change the paradigm in getting children. Yes, you may learn something from your information from the pictures, but if I'm going to become a proficient reader, I have to have the necessary skills to tackle the code within the text so that I can then use the pictures as a validation of my information than my entry. So I love the conversation. These are the conversations that you'll want to continue with next year as you start taking some of the elements of letters and really drawing it into your discussions. What are we learning from this? What are we able to validate that we're doing in our teaching, and where there may be roadblocks? Because our goal in all of this is getting to that accuracy and automaticity. Now, many of us hear about what's the reading bridge. And what Linnea really draws attention to is that sight word learning is the capacity to have a really efficient recognition of words. And how do we get to that efficiency of words is how we facilitate and correlate those phonics components. And so the piece that I'm bringing to the forefront in our conversations, we have to find that balance, because it's not about making faster readers. Our first entry is accuracy. Because if we're thinking about speed being the primary focus, then our children become really good fast guessers, and they miss the whole integrity of what it is about reading. And so the important part here, that if we work through these phases and we can really start looking at what are strengths and needs of our students, then we have a better sense of what that instructional path is going to be to get them to get to that consolidated stage of learning. That's the long-term goal. So when we talk about this conversation with our secondary teachers, that's my conversation with all of you to think about. Where are your students' abilities and where are their needs? And am I working at the correct level for some of the work that I'm doing within code? And the best way that we can make that decision of where they are is, one, listen to them read and do an error analysis. Secondly, is the phonics survey. And it's not a timed environment, and there's a whole set of opportunities to go into that content so that you can actually identify what types of abilities and needs will I need to address instructionally. And the likelihood is I use this phonics word reading roughly by second half of kindergarten and all the way up as needed through secondary. Because the structure of this tool is that we want them to be able to respond to those items within 3 seconds. If it takes longer, then that's a marker of risk, because it's not building to that level of automaticity. So the tool that you will have is that the early levels of this assessment may not be necessary for our upper elementary secondary students on letter name, letter sound. What we would begin for them may actually be at the second page, where we look at closed syllables and we get into complex syllables, long vowel, and so forth. And what you'll see in those rows is that you have a set of one syllable, and then you see multisyllabic words. So you really get an indication of where their abilities are. And then you start getting into compound and some basic prefixes and roots and suffixes. So you may not have a chance this spring to administer this. It might be interesting on a few students, and try and see what your observations are with them. Has anyone had an opportunity, whether it's this survey or another phonics survey, to be able to try this out? Sarah, what did you observe?
Yeah, I did this with a group of second graders who are actually in Jen's class. And I observed that once they got to the vowel R's, they're good on those first 2 rows, but then when it gets into the more complex and more, I guess, multisyllabic words, it's really tough for them.
And
but you could see they break it down.
And how old?
Second graders.
Okay.
Mhm.
And our other Sarah raised her hand. So what did you observe? I got 2 Sarahs in the room.
Yeah, doubled up. So what I observe, well, I work with kiddos who are in reading intervention, and it's been interesting because what I've noticed is, depending, of course, tripled, that's right, Sarah, after, sorry. Yeah, no. So what I've noticed, depending on of course, the reader, their accuracy, I started at the beginning of the year using this assessment, and I've since given it again, and I've seen that they've grown in their abilities to decode accurately. However, they a portion of my students need much more than 5 to 10 minutes to administer. They will be high in accuracy, but they may need a lot of time to just look at the word and sit with it to decode it, and then they'll be able to decode it with accuracy, but again, not with automaticity.
Great. Yes. Okay. And that's, you know, what you're sharing is what you would then collect on the form. You would make some of those notations. You would identify what the word is that they mispronounced, and then you would be able to unpack some of these. And this is a slightly different format than the one that you have in your groupings, because all of these sort of structures here are a little cleaner that you're seeing here. But one of the things that becomes reality is you're seeing, can they read real words versus nonsense words? And what that tells you is, yeah, maybe they're memorizing those words, but they don't really know the tools to crack the code. So that's the other part to this puzzle, that we need to be able to see the difference across the rows of what they're successfully able to do and where they're showing weakness. So I hope you get a chance to do this in the future, whether it's this year or next year when you have more questions about your students.
Lynn, I also want to observe on that survey, the outcome on the letter sound correspondences, that they weren't solidified, that the student missed, looks like 6. So, you know, just a call to kind of consider that as well, that if they don't know it, then in a word, it's likely they won't be able to accurately place it in the word either.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think we need about a 4-minute stretch break here, even though 2 hours we wanted to keep you going, but I know that it's been a long day. So if you can go ahead and just find those other pages so that it sort of looks like a 1-pager that has some boxes up on the top, a little bit of a space, as well as a piece of text at the bottom. If you happen to have a highlighter around, that would be great. If you find 7 stickies, or just take a piece of paper and tear it into 7 pieces and write these graphemes on them, we'll be ready to go in 4 minutes.
Did Papa sign in form? Oh, can't open it?
Is it just me, or can other?
Other people did.
Okay, I'll try again. It's still not working for me. It says I need permission. Oh, maybe I'm not on my.
I just unclicked to users in Aspen School District, so maybe
I'll try.
Yeah.
I'm switching gears so that you can put yourself up, Lori.
Sounds good. I'll take the entire 4 minutes for that.
For some reason, it's still not opening for me. Are you able to just put me in, or is there something that I need to fill out?
How about that?
Great, thank you.
Actually, it's a different form than what you had up on the top.
It is? Virtual training sign-in.
Let me see if I copied that one from the earlier one.
I shortened the URL. I wonder if that was.
Sarah, did that work?
Still can't.
Even
it's
the
weird.
second one
I've
that I
never seen it pop up like this before.
Okay, I'll just make a note and we'll problem solve that later. How about that?
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Of course, I'm muted. What can you see?
I'm seeing both your trainer notes and your slide. And that's in the
Oh,
folder.
okay, so then I'm sharing the wrong thing. How about that?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. So that is, I need to choose, put which one is screen one and which one is screen two. Oh, there it is on the screen. Okay.
Lori, I'm gonna miss having your son on the bus.
Oh, yeah.
So polite and so wonderful.
Thank you. You said that to me before, and it always makes me feel so good.
Yeah.
He's a good boy. We'll see what happens in middle school. Fingers crossed.
I think it's, if he's a polite, wonderful young man now, that's gonna last.
Well, my husband's ready to kick his butt if it doesn't, so.
Lori, where are you moving, or don't you want to talk about it? I'm just
I would love
curious.
to talk about it. We won the housing lottery in Snowmass.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, the coffee
Oh.
place, it's like brand new build. So we got a single family, 3-bedroom. It's awesome.
That, oh yes, you told me that. That's right. You told me that when I saw you. That is amazing. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
we feel
Congratulations.
so lucky. It's great,
Yeah. Yeah.
fun. It's just messy right now. You know how it is.
Yes.
Never goes smoothly.
Yeah, hopefully everyone's gotten all their materials together. You good to go, Lori?
I'm good to go. Do you think?
Yeah, we should be.
Yeah,
Most
Fred?
people hopefully are coming back very quickly here.
Okay.
I have a number of people with thumbs up ready to go, so I think we should be.
Awesome. They'll hear us talking and they'll jump in. Okay, so you've gathered your materials. Those are the things that we'll use for our lesson. On this slide here is a copy of that general phonics lesson plan, and on page 166 is on the right side what you'll see about the description of everything in that phonics lesson plan. As Lynn said before, this is more, think of it more like a menu. There really isn't just one thing you would do in each of those sub parts of the lesson, but choices that you would make. And as the instructor, you would, kind of know just what you've done, how you want to vary it, what might need more repetition, a lot of teacher choice in here based on what your students need. But following this as a guide from start to finish gives you a nice comprehensive phonics plan. And so that's what I'm going to model today. I encourage you to use this blank one to take notes, or a place where you might want to ask questions, or just jot anything down. So I believe you have that in your printed handout. And this here is just referring to that scope and sequence that is in the appendix of your book. Lynn, do you know I know you know the pages.
That's right.
I don't see them.
It's very beginning in the appendix, so it's going to be B2 and 3. And B2
Yeah.
is where it is.
So the arrows are pointing to where this lesson is derived from. And so you would assume that given this scope and sequence, that anything ahead of that has already been instructed. And so just keeping that in mind, you've taught those other things that come ahead of this. So launching into the lesson, the anticipatory set. Today we will study a new skill. We're going to learn to read and spell new words with the ch sound. just a reminder, sorry, I want to go back one because there's not a slide for it, but we have previously learned that CH says ch, as in the word chair. And I usually use a reading deck. And so there's like an example of a card that would have that reminding to the students that that's a sound that they're familiar with. This comes from Kid Lips, this literally Kid Lips. They're kind of cool of how the sounds are made for ch sound. And you can remind the kids to make that sound. It's a sound that's familiar to them. So starting with the phonological awareness practice, I'm going to say a word. You're going to repeat it. Then I will ask you to do something with it, like delete, substitute, or add a phoneme. So I would love for all of you to unmute. This gets like kind of noisy and messy, but it just gives you the experience that the kids have. Say the word chop.
Chop, chop.
Now change ch to sh.
Chop.
Chop.
Say thick.
Thick.
Change to ch.
Chick.
Chick.
Say cash.
Cash.
Change sh to ch.
Catch.
Catch.
Say watch.
Watch.
Change ch to sh.
Wash.
Say cheap.
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 Change ch to j.
Jeep.
Say I'm.
I'm
Add ch to the beginning of that.
Time.
Hey, say ought.
Thought.
To the beginning, add.
Thought.
Thought.
Say ride.
Ride.
To the beginning, add.
Ride.
Excellent. Now say shade.
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 Now take away.
Aid.
Shade.
Say chair.
Chair.
Without ch.
Air.
Say crash.
Crash.
Without k.
Crash.
Say bench.
Bench.
Without ch.
Ben.
Excellent. Such good phonological awareness you all have.
Mrs. Van Hecken.
What's that?
Mrs. Van Hecken helps.
Oh, the Higgerty gal. I bet you could be just as good, Jamie. Okay, so now we're at new concepts. So those three first pieces are pretty quick, but essential parts of the lesson. Often we want to jump into like, here's what we're going to learn today. And it's really important to, you know, sort of prime the pump with what we already know, what we're about to learn, get the kids ready for the new learning. So I'm going to say some words, and I want you to listen carefully to these words. Echo them, please, and listen for the sound that's the same in all of these words. Say the word batch.
Batch.
Say fetch.
Fetch.
Say itch.
Itch.
What did your ears hear that was the same in all of those words? Okay, go ahead and make that sound in your mirror or your phone or whatever. Notice that sound, how it formed, what sound we're familiar with. These are the questions I asked. Here are the words. Oop, hang on. All the pictures. Just let me move. Okay, so that word is batch. Say that word again.
Batch.
This word is fetch.
Fetch.
This is itch.
Itch.
Okay, what is the same? We heard, what do your eyes see that's the same in all of those words?
TCH.
TCH. So that's different than what we already know. We have learned CH says ch. So today, Margaret Hancock, what's different?
This one, all three of these words have TCH at the end.
At the end, and I'm so glad that you noticed that they were at the end of the word. So take a notice of that. What comes just before that TCH?
Short vowel.
A short vowel. Awesome. Now, kids probably wouldn't get it as well as you guys, so you might have to massage that a little bit. And so the pattern is TCH, sounds like ch, and it comes after a short vowel. So this is really like a spelling feature, and it's in the final position, which you all offered up all the right information. And if your kids could do that, that's amazing. Okay, so go ahead and get your letter tiles. I'm going to switch to my dot cam here. Set your letter tiles up sort of in front of you. Got mine here. They don't have to be in any particular order. Okay, so with these letter tiles, i.e. Post-its, I bought some chip kits, by the way, so we have some really cool stuff instead of using Post-its for the future. Let's make the word itch. Can you echo itch?
Itch.
Let's tap that out. Itch. Let's build it. Itch. We're going to change itch to pitch. Itch. So I've added a P in the P sound in the initial part of the word. We're going to change P to D. What's my new word? Because you sound my it. Awesome. We're going to change sh to sh. What's my new word, Brad?
Dish.
Dish. Excellent. Now I'm going to change I to ah. There, reveal. What do I have?
Dash.
Dash. Excellent job. Change D to my new word, Julie Zetz.
And you're going to call me Mash.
I'm going off the top of my head who I remembered seeing. So if I leave anybody out, it's not intentional. Okay, so I have mash. I'm going to change sh to my new word, Kim Knoll.
Match.
Match. Good job. Change to what is my new word? Anybody? Patch. Awesome, everybody. Great. Let's change ah to I. And my new word, everyone? Pitch. Pitch. And finally, I'm going to delete the P, and I'm going to come back to my word that I started with, which was
itch.
Itch. So that's an example of word chaining. Has a lot of phonological awareness to it, but you have a lot of your new feature of the sound in here. Noticing that it never changed position from the middle, from the final position of the word. Okay. From there,
did you freeze?
Sorry.
It's like,
Nope, I'm gonna stay. I just made a decision to stay on my doc cam. So now we're gonna do some phoneme grapheme mapping. And this is one of the pages that's blank in your appendix as well. You'll see that the source of this is down here. And this is something that I just bought a bunch of. If you're really interested, I have third grade just grabbed onto this, and we're doing a little kind of perusing with this and exploring. It's called Phonics and Spelling Through Phoneme Grapheme Mapping. And so we have this in-house now, and it's a whole lot more than just the grid, but we're going to talk about how this grid works. So I'm going to model for you how to map the sounds of pitch. Get my fun little beads. You guys love these things. Okay. So the word was pitch. I'm going to put one sound in each block. That word is pitch. Okay, notice my beads are only 3, but because we're focusing on the phonemes, the sounds. I, ch, 1 sound per block. Okay, the next word I'm going to do is batch. The word is batch. Batch. Okay, let's do one together. You have, it looks like this. So you have a shorter version of it if you want to grab that. And whatever you chose to use for markers or chips, you can even do a little pencil mark. You can get creative, whatever you want to do. So let's do the word hat. So together, I want to hear you say the sounds as you're moving your chips. I can't see you moving. I know that you're doing it though, but I'm going to hear you say those sounds. So let's say hatch. Great. Okay. Now we're going to integrate some letters into this. I'm going to use the word patch. Watch me. There's my word patch. And now I'm going to keep that and I'm going to go back to this. This was the sound. What sound? What letter?
P.
P.
Great. What sound? Letter?
A.
Great. Final sound was what letters?
TCH.
Excellent. So notice 3 letters go in that box because that is the phoneme, the grapheme that makes the phoneme. So we wouldn't want to stretch that out because it's the 1 sound that's coming in there. That is phoneme grapheme mapping. So now it's your turn. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab, if you don't already have it, your page here. And we're all going to do, actually you're going to do it, the word pitch. Okay, so you could be muted, you could say it to yourself, go through the process and end with those words on the page. Or the word on the page in the right boxes. Is that clear? Am I being clear? We're going to do 3 words. So just look up when you're done with the first one. I'll watch for your eyes up on the screen. Okay, next word is stitch. The final word is chat. Okay, so let's go over that. The first word was pitch. So, the second word was stitch. The last word was chat. Notice here, we've kind of thrown them a curveball. I don't always usually do that. Like if I was teaching this, I would keep it pure and maybe the next day throw in that differentiation. But since we did that, what's the difference here? Why didn't we use TCH? And I would ask kids that. Somebody want to just offer that up?
Because it's at the beginning of the word, not at the end of the word, and it's before the short vowel.
Correct. A lot of times with my students, if I taught this on that day and did that, they would put that in there anyway. They overdo the new learning until I sort of rectified that for them. But maybe in a general ed classroom, that might not be the issue. Chances are you get to go a lot faster. But you always want to watch out for those kids that need that, you know, their true clarity. Okay,
Lori,
yes.
Would you, you know, typically what I would do prior to writing is we would be sorting so they could visually see it as well, that beginning in the middle. And then that makes that differentiation in that ability to kind of move between ending and beginning sounds and writing a little more successful for most kids, I think.
So when I look at the phonics lesson plan, I see sorting as an extended practice opportunity. And we're in guided practice.
I meant whole group. I don't mean independent.
So that would be your guided practice, would be the sort.
Do
If
a sort.
you already did CH and TCH that, and you felt your group was ready for that differentiation. You
right.
Would, okay, that makes sense.
I think that's really, I mean, for me in first grade, they're first graders.
Mm-hmm.
For us to do that together in a guided practice is really beneficial. So, and then when we go to this practice, this mapping, they seem to be even more successful.
Awesome. Lynn, did you want to weigh in on that, on the sorting in any way?
Well, we can debrief after with it.
Okay. Okay. So next we have dictation. So sounds, words, and sentences. Today we're going to dictate the word itch. And so you want them to echo the word. So say the word itch, itch, and then we tap it out, itch. So one line for each sound that you heard, itch. And then go ahead and spell it, itch. Okay. Next, we have a sentence. I'm going to say the sentence. My dog had an itch. Ask them to echo that. My dog had an itch. In the direction to draw a line for every one word they hear. My dog had an itch. Now they're ready to go spell it. My dog had an itch. Now you'll notice here that every word in this sentence is controlled to your scope and sequence of what you've already taught. There wouldn't be anything in here. You wouldn't say my dog, Jerome, had an itch because maybe you didn't teach that the features of the word Jerome or a two-syllable word or something like that. You would isolate it to what they can be successful with. That way you can come in if they make a mistake and you know, intervene with a strategy of, oh, just check that word, go ahead and tap it. Without telling them it's wrong, ask them to recheck it. So there's a lot of opportunity in here to catch the error and have them self-correct it rather than you mark it wrong and give it to them the next day. It's immediate feedback, as long as you stay in that controlled text.
This may be specific just to this example, but how important is it if a kid is having trouble distinguishing CH from TCH? Like I hear words like much, teach, itch, batch. It all sounds the same to me. As someone trying to sort this stuff out, is it more important that they get one or the other, or is it really important for them to make that distinction?
What's important is that they show you that they learned what you taught them. And if you followed a scope and sequence, then you taught them when to use CH, and now you've added the layer of TCH and the features of that when you use that. And so like a structured language approach allows you to know those rules, and then you transfer those rules and I call them generalizations because there's always exceptions to the rules. In a word like much is an exception, right? That should be a TCH. So there's always those oddballs. I know that Words Their Way calls them oddballs. but it would be part of your teaching and you would have kind of addressed that. So we're coming in at a place where, you know, here, but we don't know because we didn't go through the lessons together, but we would have done all of that work ahead of time. And if a student made a mistake here, it probably wouldn't be a surprise to you. You would know how to intervene. And you would also have a little history on that student. And that might be a student that needed greater repetition. And maybe is seeing one of the gals in the reading room. And so, you know, the two of you might be tackling the repetition together of that so that they get exposure to that across the day.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen because there's something I want you to do to connect to the meeting. Okay, you should be able to see a bunch of circles with the word pitch in the middle. So what I'd like you to do is to take a few seconds to yourself and just in the chat pop in what you think, you know, anyway, anything that you know about the meaning. What does pitch mean? In what context? Just throw some ideas in there. This is a multiple meaning word. What do you know? Okay, baseball, pitch a fit. Lots of baseball, throw. A sound. Oh, so like the pitch of your voice, type of sound, music, note in music. Wood saturated with sap. Yeah, Brad. A verb and a noun for the part of speech. Singing, to pitch an idea. An idea, so cool. Here is all of the variations. Oops, sorry. Dark sticky substance, is that what you were referring to, Brad, maybe? Asphalt. A resin from a tree sap, that was Brad's. We all got that one. Sales pitch. So a lot in that word. I mean, you could probably spend another segment of your lesson really talking about all of those. Perhaps it's going to lead into a decodable text that you're reading, so you might feature that one. In this case, it's throwing, and so I would talk about that one. All right, so next, at the bottom of your page, you have your decodable text. The title is Max and Mitch Play Fetch. Take a highlighter or a pencil if you have it, and go ahead and underline all of the words that have the grapheme TCH. Trigraph TCH. Go ahead and underline them. If you're done, go ahead and count how many you got. Throw it in the chat if you have it. See if we agree on the number. Including the title. So it looks like we have 23, including the title. Yeah. So right there, you have 23 opportunities for the student to now see this in the context of a sentence and a story and to practice reading that word. So just jumping ahead, and then I'll come back. These are the words that you've highlighted or underlined. And in your book, there is this suggestion for a transfer to text process. So what we did was highlight those words. We would go ahead and read just the highlighted words. Then read the passage with the highlighted words. And the suggestion is to read quarterly on day one. The next day would be to read the passage with the highlighted words, then read a clean copy. Here, they're saying passage 2 and 3, they're different passages with TCH. So that begs the question of where am I getting that from? So, building our library of decodable texts to see if we have that. But in either case, you're starting with the words, reading those words, then reading the passage with the highlighted words, then fading out those highlights. Okay. Let's do a quick debrief of that because we are getting short on time. It's 6:25. Lynn, did we want to do breakout rooms for that or just a big group chat?
I do a big chat.
Okay. So feel free to ask questions, ponder, wonder, make a connection.
I had two, just being in the classroom, I had two things I guess I want to just mention, and like, I'm hoping that we can fix for next year. I just want to know, like, how long did it take you to plan all this out and pull the words and do everything?
Well, I can answer that on 2 levels. For here, this was all given to me.
Okay.
In my life as both a special education teacher and a reading specialist, I had a curriculum that really pulled it all together for me. And this is where I feel like, I know that OG and Carrie could probably speak to this. She could probably answer it. They make their own lessons. This is where I feel like a curriculum is really supportive because it's thought out and your brain capacity gets to go to where the students are and how they're receiving the information versus how you're actually delivering the lesson or how much you pulled in to get the lesson together.
And like, how many kids are you wanting to be in a group? And like, I'm just trying to think of like the real world classroom. Like, like how many kids are we talking, like 6 kids? Are we talking like 4 kids in this group? And then like how many groups like can we get to like this? Because like, how long would the lesson go? I'm thinking it would be at least a 30-minute lesson.
Yeah, this was, without any of the technical glitches, I could have done this probably in 30 minutes. And I could have done this with a whole class of perhaps first graders. The kids that I saw were older and so had different gaps, and I had them in smaller groups at an intervention level. But this could be appropriate for, I think, a first grade, early second grade presentation as a whole group. And then you'd follow up perhaps with kids who needed extra repetition in another way with this, maybe some more extra words, sample words, rereading the words you did. I'll take any feedback on that from anybody.
I've pretty much done this lesson quite a bit. I haven't always done the tiles at the same time whole group because tiles are a pain to put together whole group, but I've done every other component in whole group. I cannot bear to do it, do 6 rotating groups of this. So every other piece I do whole group. What I find has been helpful is that green book, the anchor book, because of all the words in that anchor book that I got through Take Flight. So that's really helpful in picking some words. I still have to use my trainings to help me decide on sequence and which words I'm going to use and how I'm going to use them. But having a book or a resource, Christy, your book, I love your book for passages, the 6-minute fluency, where you can get into the phonetic passages. So absolutely having some kind of go-to book where you can pull that phonics focus that you're looking at is so helpful. But once I trained my kiddos to do this, they're great. They're so fabulous. But the tile thing I used to do long ago, Lynn, when I first was hanging out with you, whole class, but that took hours to put together.
Materials can be messy with little
The tile thing is hard whole group. And I know that 2nd grade is doing it, and they're pretty successful because they have the kids cut their own tiles and their own letters. So they might want to speak to that.
And I watched Jamie do this lesson today in her class. I was just doing walkthroughs and I was in there and they were so good. The kids really knew what to do.
I wasn't even planning it, Sarah.
I know, look at this.
Yeah, I definitely found that a routine, while it may feel like, oh, it's like the same every day, but the concept is different. And it really provides the kids that structure of they know what's next, that if you forget what's next, they're going to tell you. And it allows you then to use that a shorter amount of time, because you're not spending time telling them now today, this is going to be completely different today than it was yesterday. You're going to have your variations of practice, but in terms of the groove of how it goes, they come to anticipate that and lean into that. And that really supports their learning and the cognitive load that they don't need to bear to get through the lesson.
I've been using those West Virginia lessons a lot to go along with our phonics features. And I don't use tiles ever in this big whole group. It's way too much. I don't have them cut them out. I do spelling sorts. I do developmental spelling, and they do that, but it's not, whole group lesson. But then I take that whole group lesson, and for my 2, low kids that need intervention, I bring that into their small group and we redo it, or we do it, then we might do the tiles with those kids, or just build on that whole group lesson.
Yeah, and again, remember that was just an option. In the things that I would do, I would have a set of words on a page that were right there. And we coded the words with the diacritical marks and things like that. So we didn't do the manipulating for that as well. So again, just going back to what Lynn said, it's a menu, right? It's not like you have to do that in every lesson. It's a choice, an option. And maybe in small group, the tiles would be more conducive, the manipulative pieces.
Also with wipe off tables and wipe off boards, what I think that.
Whoops, Carrie, you went off.
Oh, I'm sorry. And I was just babbling. But I've used the wipe off board and that works really well. And I think it's also really nice when you have like the wipe off tables in your room. You don't even have to pull out a board. Usually your toolbox of markers are sitting right there. So I think that's another way to get around the block, which could be a fiasco. It looks really great, but I could see that with 18 kids at one time just being, woo.
One possibility that you can actually do is that if you have a bucket of cut up 1, inch squares, so you go into the workroom where you've made a mistake on paper or whatever, so you create a bucket of it. And then at the tables, you'll say, count out 7 squares. And then what you actually have them do is, I'm going to give you the sound, you write the graphy. So it gives them one more practice. And then on the TCH, you might show them the TCH. I want you to write that on the 7th square. So you don't have to do any cut ups, anything like that. You just push that in for practice.
I have a question, and I know this is a ridiculous question because I read it in the book, but I just have to know because different linguistic, phonetic structures have handled it differently. And so when we were doing this practice with, you know, underlining the sounds that went together, I go back and forth between QU, and I know QU has two sounds, but I know some linguistic practices keep them together. But then this practice I saw last night did not keep it together. So what's the deal?
So Jamie, part of that is driven by the program. If certain programs are going to validate the QU as one unit, then you follow the program. Linguistically, it's two sounds, and you will want to consider validating that as well when you're even drawing the number of lines. But then you might initiate, let's circle the QU because 99% of the time they help each other. That's the best way that I've brought it into classrooms.
That makes really good sense, doing the two, because you're tapping it out and it's two sounds. Is it the same with, what about with X?
So X is another one. It's the QU and X are your two troublemakers. So, you know, X is going to be the same scenario. When you're tapping it out, you're going to validate that it has two phonemes. And you can even show them, well, if I were just to spell by sound for the word fox, I would spell it F-O-K-S because I'm doing some really smart sound spelling connections. But in our English language, if I put F-O-K-S in front of you, you're going to think that it's more than one because I just added a plural S. So when we are learning that and it doesn't fit from a meaning perspective, then we're going to realize, I wonder whether that should be an X. So not leaving it to chance, but explaining what is actually materializing in their phonological system and what will need to be understood orthographically. And when we get back next time, we'll be doing phonography mapping. We'll review and we'll look at some of the templates and how that would actually transfer to a phonography map beyond what you just did with the 3 words of TCH. Go for it, Lori.
Just thank you for your time tonight. It's 6:35. If you didn't sign in, send me an email and I'll make sure you get the form, or I'll sign you in somehow. And we'll see you on Thursday. Thanks for your time and have a great night.
I put in a couple links if you want to see what phonographing looks like. You can click on that and you can get a sampler with what I just put into the book, onto the thing. Thank you for everyone's conversation.
Yeah, thanks for your participation.